Here we have the classic figure 4 deadfall trap trigger. As you can see, we have the support post, we have the lever, and then we have the bait stick. When properly made, these things can be incredibly sensitive, and they do work, but in my opinion there's one major drawback. They take a lot of effort and a fair amount of skill to construct. Even after you've cut all the pieces, you're going to spend some time fidgeting with it to make sure all the pieces fit together properly to have a nice sensitive trigger. This elegant little trigger is called the Promontory Peg. As you can see, it's far simpler to construct than the figure 4, though there is a trick to it, which I'm going to explain. A trick that had anthropologists and archaeologists stumped for almost 100 years. The Promontory Peg is so named because it was discovered up near Promontory, Utah as well. They found hundreds of these little sharpened pegs in caves and so on. Archaeologists and such figured that this was part of a deadfall trap, but they could never get it to work. Now, a fellow named Larry Dean Olson, who taught wilderness survival skills over at BYU, put a $100 bet for anybody who could figure out how to make this work. Another fellow named George Michauid from Driggs, Idaho, who also teaches primitive skills, took him up on the bet and was able to figure it out. Up until this point, people had always been making these pegs using a steel knife to cut the little platform and the mating surface of the post. And because they did so, the wood was far too slick to create the friction that was needed to hold the thing together. Which is really interesting. He just thought, what type of tools would the people who have used this originally, what type of tools would they have had? And the answer was stone knives. As near as I can tell, the way this trap works is a simple lever. This part right here, the post, is a lever that its fulcrum point, or the part that it pivots over, is on the tip of the peg. Now, the weight of the deadfall pressing down on the top of it locks these two surfaces together between the peg and the post due to friction. Now, when that friction is overcome by this peg's tendency to cantilever out of that area, that's when it trips the trap. Also, the way it's set up, it throws the pieces clear of the deadfall so they won't hang it up. If you make this trap wrong, if it's too rough down here or the lever's too short, whatever, this thing will lock tight together and will not trip. That's why I recommend, at least it seemed to work for me, having a post being at least 2 to 3 times the length of the sharpened part of the peg. That seems to give just about the right amount of leverage versus that fluffed up end to hold it in place until a little game animal comes and nibbles at the tip or tries to pull them apart or forces it open. On the left I have the figure 4 that you saw demonstrated earlier, and on the right I have the Promontory Peg. Why do I think the Promontory Peg is such an amazing little trap trigger? Well, think about it. Look at the amount of materials needed to create a figure 4 on the left versus the amount of materials to create one Promontory Peg on the right. Also, look at the workmanship that's required to make a figure 4. All those parts have to fit together properly for that trap to operate. The Promontory Peg is going to take a little bit of fitting as well, but not nearly as many cuts or angles. In short, the Promontory Peg is far more efficient. It's a more efficient use of materials and a more efficient use of time. In the amount of time that it would take you to make a figure 4, you could probably make 6 or 7 Promontory Pegs. You could make dozens of them and carry them with you in no time at all. And because they don't require as much straight sticks as the figure 4, you can make them out of less desirable materials. This makes sense to me why the Native Americans would have used it to such an extent, especially in an area where the primary protein in their diet was from small game. It just took less work, and especially in a survival situation or a primitive living situation, having to work less to get your food is a good thing. Here I have a little piece of coyote willow. Willow happens to be fantastic for these type of projects because it's an easy wood to work with and generally comes in nice straight sticks. Not only can it be made using solely stone tools, but when you do use stone tools, it actually makes the trap better. It automatically creates certain characteristics that are difficult to achieve with a knife. Now I'm going to start it out with this piece of obsidian. but for brevity's sake, I'm going to finish it with a saw, and I make a notch about an inch and a quarter, inch and a half up from the bottom. So that looks good. There we go. So I have that cut right there. Now I'm going to make the same cut, same distance from the other end of the stick on the same side. There we go. And then finally, the third cut goes equidistant between these two, but on the opposite side, right about there. As you can see, using the stone tool works pretty quickly. Not as quick as my Leatherman, but still pretty quickly. Saw in at that same angle, roughly, and get this done quickly. You cut the notches about halfway through the stick. Now you want to see a magic trick? Here's the stick. You can see the two notches on that side and one notch on the back. Put your thumbs on the front with the notch on the back, and you just start to bend. Take that little crack all the way down. There is one promontory peg. Then you do the same to the other side. I just lost a little bit of bark, but there we go. 2 promontory pegs and a post, or the trigger part of it. Now I've experimented with this trap, leaving this top part square as it is. That even with it square, only about that width of the pith there in the middle touches the post anyway for it to pivot on. And so it doesn't give you anything, just makes it harder to bait it. So it is nice to just clean it up and carve it down to a point, which is of course the way that the Native Americans did it from the pictures I've seen. Of course, if you were doing this with a stone tool, you just sit there and grind it on a piece of sandstone or another coarse rock until you got the shape that you wanted. You saw just how quick it was for me to make that. And of course, here's the second one. It would only take me another 30 seconds or so to clean that one up and get it ready for service. If you use a knife or a saw, it doesn't get a nice even fuzziness on that platform. That can be easily remedied by just rubbing that platform on a stone or whatever you have, or if you're careful, you can do it with the saw itself. There we go. Now I got a nice fuzzy surface. This does take some trial and error, so bear with me. I'm hoping to get this thing set up real nice. This darn thing is pretty heavy. As you can tell, it's a very sensitive trap, and the way the cinder block is making it a little bit difficult to set. There we go. I'm sure if I were somebody who relied on these from my supper and made them every day, I'd be a lot better at making them. As it is, I've just experimented enough to understand the basic principles. Pretend this is a mouse, and the mouse is right over here and decides he wants to eat the bait on my trap. He's going to climb up here and start gnawing on the bait right there on the tip of that trigger. And if it's wedged between those two pieces of wood, he's going to try to pry it apart. As it is, I haven't tried this one yet. This one might be a little bit stiff. We'll find out. It did seem to want to trip pretty easily when I was playing with it. Nope, didn't take much effort at all. If you're curious if a cinder block is adequate to put food on the table, I think the potato thinks so. And the potato is probably a lot tougher than a mouse. These are one of those golden little bits of information that just have been lost to time. I'm very grateful to George Michauid for figuring out how this works again and sharing that information on the net. And hopefully I've been able to take it a little bit step further, explaining more about the mechanics of the trap and how it was used, why it would have been preferred over more complicated traps. So anyway, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. And go outside. Turn off the computer and go outside.